It began with a silence so deep it felt alive, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. The barn stood at the edge of a forgotten dirt road, its roof sagging under the weight of decades, its walls leaning as if tired from holding in secrets for far too long. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth and old timber, the kind of smell that carries memories, even if you have never been here before. A single beam of moonlight slipped through a gap in the roof, cutting across the darkness like a blade, and in that pale light dust floated lazily, each speck a tiny fragment of time itself. The door resisted, at first swollen from years of storms and neglect, but with a groan that seemed almost human. It gave way, the sound echoing into the emptiness inside. The beam of a flashlight pierced the black, revealing shapes under thick blankets of dust and cloth, hulking outlines that hinted at something once powerful, now reduced to shadows. The floor creaked underfoot, each step stirring the stale air and sending tiny motes swirling in the light. The first shape was tall and narrow, a stack of crates, their labels faded to nothing. The second was low and wide, the cloth draped over it, sagging in the middle as if weighed down by years of forgotten stories. The hand reached out, fingers brushing against the fabric. It was rough, dry, brittle with age, and beneath it, the cold, hard curve of metal. The cloth peeled back slowly, the sound of it tearing through the quiet like paper being ripped, and then the light caught it. A glint of chrome dulled by time, a badge half hidden under grime, the letters barely visible but enough to make the breath catch. This was no ordinary machine. This was a name that once commanded respect on racetracks and boulevards, a name whispered in collector circles with reverence. The beam of light traced the lines of the bodywork even under the dust. The design was unmistakable. Every curve, every angle spoke of an era when cars were more than transportation. They were statements of power and beauty. The leather inside was cracked and faded, but the scent still carried a ghost of its former life. The steering wheel worn smooth by hands that once gripped it with purpose. The odometer frozen at a number that hinted at journeys long past. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards and sending a shiver through the air. But inside the barn, the world felt suspended, caught between the past and the present. Every sound seemed amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the soft thud of footsteps, the faint rustle of mice in the corners. The mind could almost see it as it once was, gleaming under the sun, roaring down a coastal highway. The driver smiling, the engine singing its deep mechanical song, and then the image would fade, replaced by the cold stillness of the present. The dust settling once more over the curves, the chrome, the glass. The story was there, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be told, and as the light lingered on the badge, the name came into view. A name that once meant power, prestige, and dreams. The kind of name that could still make collectors whisper in awe. The heart pounded faster because this was not just a discovery. It was a resurrection, a chance to bring back to life something the world had forgotten. The barn seemed to lean in, listening, as the decision formed in the mind. This car would not remain a ghost of the past. It would breathe again. It would roar again, and the world would remember. The wind outside howled as if in protest or perhaps in warning. But the choice was made, the first step had been taken, and there was no turning back. The dust would be wiped away, the rust would be fought, the story would be told, and somewhere deep inside the cold metal and faded leather, a spark would awaken, a spark that had been waiting 50 long years for this very moment. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly in the cold air as the dust swirled lazily, catching the light like tiny golden sparks. The barn's wooden ribs groaned softly, as if the structure itself was waking from a long sleep. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon shifted, its wings rustling in the darkness. The sound was small, but in this silence it felt like a thunderclap. The figure holding the light took another step forward, boots sinking into the soft layer of hay and dirt that had built up over decades. The smell was stronger here, a mix of oil, leather, and something faintly metallic, like the ghost of gasoline long evaporated. The beam slid across the floor, catching the edge of a rusted toolbox, a stack of yellowed newspapers, and then a tire. It was half buried under dust, but the shape was unmistakable. The flashlight lingered, tracing the curve of the rubber, the faint outline of a wire-spoke wheel. The heart began to beat faster. This was no farm truck or forgotten tractor. This was something else. The cloth covering the car sagged heavily in the middle, weighed down by years of neglect. The hand reached out again, fingers brushing the fabric. It felt brittle, like it might crumble at the slightest pull. Slowly, carefully, it was lifted. The sound of it tearing free from the metal beneath was sharp in the still air. The first thing revealed was chrome, dulled, but still catching the light in a way that made it seem alive. The beam followed the line of the fender, over the graceful curve of the hood, and then stopped at the badge. The letters were faint, but they were there. A name that once turned heads in Monte Carlo, that roared down the Mulsanne Strait, that graced the covers of glossy magazines in an era when speed was art. The breath caught in the throat. This was not just a car, this was a legend. The mind began to race. How had it ended up here, in this forgotten barn on the edge of nowhere? Who had driven it last? And why had they walked away, leaving it to the mercy of time? The flashlight moved again, sweeping over the windshield. The glass was coated in a thick layer of grime, but through it, the outline of the interior could be seen. The seats were cracked, the leather faded to a dull brown, but the shape of them, the deep bolsters, the stitching, spoke of craftsmanship from another age. The steering wheel was large, thin-rimmed, worn smooth by hands that had once gripped it with purpose. A faint glint caught the eye. On the passenger seat, half buried under a layer of dust, lay a pair of driving gloves. They were stiff with age, the leather dry and cracked, but they seemed to hold the shape of the hands that had worn them. The wind outside rose, rattling the loose boards of the barn. The sound was like a whisper, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. The figure stepped closer, running a hand along the curve of the hood. The metal was cold, but beneath the rust there was still strength. The beam of light caught something else, a small folded piece of paper wedged between the dashboard and the windshield. It was yellowed, the edges curled, but it was still there. Carefully, it was pulled free. The paper crackled in protest. Unfolding it revealed a photograph. Black and white, slightly faded, but clear enough to see. The car, gleaming and new, parked in front of a grand hotel. Beside it stood a man in a tailored suit, his arm around a woman in a flowing dress. Both were smiling, the kind of smile that belongs to people who believe the future is theirs. On the back of the photograph, in neat handwriting, were 3 words and a date. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They hinted at a story of triumph, of loss, of something worth hiding for 50 years. The flashlight beam wavered slightly. The barn seemed to close in, the shadows deepening. Somewhere in the darkness, a drop of water fell from the roof, landing with a soft pat on the hood. It left a clean spot in the dust, a tiny glimpse of the paint beneath, deep, rich, and still beautiful. The decision was made in that moment. This car would not remain here, entombed in dust and silence. It would be brought back to life. But first, the rest of its story had to be uncovered. The beam of light moved to the rear of the barn, where more shapes loomed under covers. Were they more cars, or just piles of forgotten junk? The only way to know was to look. The first cover was pulled back, revealing not another car but a stack of wooden crates. The labels were faded, but one word stood out: parts. The lid of the top crate was pried open, the nails squealing in protest. Inside, wrapped in oiled paper, were gleaming pieces of metal, parts that matched the car in the center of the barn. This was no accident. Someone had planned for this car to be restored. Someone had left everything needed to bring it back. But why had they never returned? The wind outside howled again, louder this time, as if urging the search to continue. The flashlight beam swept across the barn, catching glimpses of more clues. A license plate leaning against the wall, a racing helmet hanging from a nail, a faded map pinned to a beam. Every object was a piece of a puzzle, and somewhere in this barn, the final piece was waiting. The air inside the barn felt heavier now, as if every breath was pulling in fragments of the past. The beam of the flashlight moved slowly across the far wall where the faded map hung, its edges curled and brittle. The paper looked ready to crumble at the slightest touch, yet it had survived here untouched for decades. The light caught faint markings on it, small circles drawn in red ink connected by thin lines, each one labelled with a name that was barely legible. The handwriting was the same as on the back of the photograph, the same steady strokes, the same deliberate style. The figure stepped closer, brushing away a layer of dust from the map. The names began to take shape. They were cities scattered across Europe, places known for speed and glamour. Monte Carlo, Le Mans, Monza. The realization settled in heavy and undeniable. This car had not just been driven, it had been raced, and not in small-town events, but on the grandest stages of them all. A sudden creak from the shadows made the heart jolt. The flashlight swung toward the sound, revealing nothing but the dark outline of another covered shape. The silence returned, but it was no longer the same. It carried a tension now, as if the barn itself was aware of the intrusion. The figure moved toward the second shape, pulling at the cover. It resisted at first, clinging to the object beneath, before finally sliding free, revealing not another car but a workbench covered in tools, each one perfectly arranged as if waiting for the mechanic to return. Wrenches lined up by size screwdrivers with their handles worn smooth, a small oil can still half full, the smell of it faint but distinct. On the bench lay a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked and faded, the edges of the pages yellowed with age. It was tied shut with a thin strip of cloth, the knot stiff from years of neglect. The cloth was untied slowly. The pages opened with a soft sigh of release. Inside were sketches of the car, detailed drawings of its engine, its body, its interior. Alongside each sketch were notes written in the same hand as the map and the photograph. Some were technical measurements, others were short sentences that hinted at moments in time, testing at dawn, rain on the track engine running hot in the final lap. The pages turned one by one, each revealing more of the story, until a single sheet stopped the hand mid-turn. It was different from the rest, the paper thicker, the ink darker. It was a letter addressed to someone whose name had been smudged beyond recognition. The words were brief, but they carried weight. It is hidden where no one will find it until the time is right. Take care of her. She carries more than just speed. She carries the truth. The words echoed in the mind. The truth. What truth could a car carry? The flashlight beam drifted back to the vehicle in the center of the barn. Its silent form now seemed to hold more than just metal and history. It felt like a vault, a keeper of secrets that had been locked away for half a century. The wind outside rose again, rattling the boards harder this time. A loose shutter slammed against the wall with a hollow thud. The sound reverberated through the barn like a warning. The figure's grip on the flashlight tightened. The search was no longer just about finding a rare car. It was about uncovering whatever truth had been buried with it. The eyes scanned the barn again, looking for anything that might offer another clue, and then they saw it, a small trap door in the far corner, half hidden under a pile of old tarps. The wood was dark with age, the handle rusted but still intact. The pile was pulled away, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The trap door creaked as it was lifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was colder, carrying with it the faint scent of oil and something else, something metallic and sharp. The beam of the flashlight probed. The darkness below the steps were narrow and uneven, each one groaning under the weight as they were descended. The walls were close, the air thick, The sound of breathing loud in the confined space at the bottom was a small room, its walls lined with shelves stacked with boxes and jars. The light caught the gleam of metal inside some of the jars, bolts and screws preserved in oil. Others held small parts wrapped in cloth. In the center of the room sat a single wooden crate larger than the rest, its lid secured with heavy nails. The surface was marked with the same handwriting as the map and the notebook. A single word underlined twice: evidence. The heart pounded harder, the mind racing with possibilities. The crate was dragged into the light, the nails pried loose one by one. The lid lifted slowly, the contents revealed piece by piece, each one pulling the story deeper into mystery and danger. The crate sat in the center of the small underground room, its wood darkened with age, the nails bent slightly from the force of being pried loose. The lid lifted with a slow, reluctant groan, as if it had been holding its breath for 50 years inside. The smell was stronger, a mix of oil and something faintly metallic that clung to the air. The beam of the flashlight revealed layers of cloth wrapped tightly around objects of varying shapes and sizes. The first bundle was small and heavy. The cloth stiff with age, it was unwrapped, slowly revealing a gleam of polished metal, a gear perhaps, or part of an engine. But it was engraved with something unusual, a series of numbers and letters that did not match any standard part marking. The second bundle was lighter, wrapped in a softer fabric that had once been white, but was now yellowed with time. Inside was a leather pouch. Its surface cracked, the flap open to reveal a stack of photographs, each one black and white. Each one showing the car in different places: a narrow mountain road, a crowded pit lane, a city street lined with cheering spectators. In some of the photos, the suited man and the woman from the earlier picture appeared smiling, waving, sometimes standing beside the car, sometimes inside it. But as the stack was turned, the images began to change. The smiles faded. The crowds were gone. The car was parked in shadowed alleys or beside unmarked buildings. The expressions on their faces were tense, guarded. Beneath the photographs lay a small metal box, its surface dented but still solid. The latch clicked open with a sharp sound. Inside were documents folded and sealed with wax. The seal bore a crest unfamiliar yet intricate. The paper inside was brittle, but the ink still dark. The words were not in English, but the dates were clear and they matched the years the car had been seen in the photographs. The writing was hurried, urgent, as if meant to be hidden quickly. The last item in the crate was the most unsettling, a small object wrapped in oilcloth. When the cloth was peeled away, it revealed a badge, not from the car, but from a uniform. The metal was tarnished, yet the emblem was still visible. It was military, not from any modern army, but from a force that had vanished decades ago. The kind of emblem that carried with it stories of conflict and secrecy. The pieces began to form a picture, though still incomplete. The car was more than a machine, it had been a witness, perhaps even a participant in events far larger than any race or rally. The truth hinted at in the letter was beginning to take shape, but it was tangled in shadows and unanswered questions. A sound from above broke the stillness, a faint creak of wood, a shift of weight. The flashlight beam shot upward, catching only the underside of the trapdoor. The air felt colder now. The sense of being alone in the barn was gone, replaced by the prickling awareness of unseen eyes. The crate's contents were gathered quickly. The lid replaced the nails pressed back into place. The flashlight beam cut a path back to the stairs, each step up feeling longer than the last. When the trapdoor closed behind the figure, the barn seemed different. The shadows deeper, the silence heavier. The car sat in the center, unchanged, yet somehow more alive, as if it too knew that its long-kept secrets were closer to the surface than ever before. The photograph, the badge, the documents all pointed to a story that had been buried for half a century, and now the choice was clear: either walk away and leave the past undisturbed, or keep digging and risk whatever truths had been hidden for so long. The barn felt different now, as if the air itself had thickened. The flashlight beam swept slowly across the car, its curves catching the light in a way that made it seem almost alive. The photograph, the badge, the documents all lay in a small pile on the workbench, each one a fragment of a story that had been buried for half a century. The mind kept circling back to the letter hidden where no one will find it. Until the time is right, she carries the truth. The decision to keep digging was no longer a choice. It was a pull, something deep and insistent. The figure moved toward the car again, running a hand along the cold metal. The dust left streaks on the fingertips, but beneath it, the paint still held a deep luster. The hood latch resisted for a moment before giving way with a dull click. The hood rose slowly, revealing the engine bay. The block was massive, the components arranged with precision, but there was something else tucked into the narrow space between the firewall and the engine. A small metal container bolted in place. The bolts came free with effort. The container lifted out heavier than it looked. The latch snapped open, and inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. The cloth peeled back to reveal a stack of envelopes, each sealed with the same crest as the documents from the crate. The paper was thick, the ink dark. The writing inside was in the same foreign language, but certain words stood out: names, dates, locations, all tied to events from a time when the world was on edge. One envelope was different, smaller. The seal broken long ago. Inside was a single sheet of paper in English. The handwriting was hurried, almost desperate. It spoke of a courier mission, a race across borders under the guise of competition. The car had been the perfect cover, fast enough to outrun pursuit, ordinary enough to pass through checkpoints without suspicion. Hidden within its panels had been messages, photographs and names of people whose lives depended on secrecy. The badge from the crate was not just a relic, it was a mark of the unit that had orchestrated the mission. The realization settled in heavy. The car was not just a machine, it was a witness to history, a silent accomplice in a dangerous game, and perhaps the reason it had been hidden was not to preserve it, but to protect those still connected to its past. A sound from outside broke the stillness, the crunch of gravel under tires. The beam of light through the barn's gaps shifted as headlights swept across the yard. The figure's pulse quickened the documents. The badge, the photographs were gathered quickly, stuffed into a bag. The hood lowered, the latch clicked shut. The flashlight snapped off, plunging the barn into darkness. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. The barn door creaked open. A silhouette filled the frame, tall, broad-shouldered. The voice that spoke was low and measured. "You found her, didn't you?" The figure in the doorway stepped inside, the light from outside casting long shadows across the floor. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken questions, and the knowledge that whatever happened next would decide whether the truth stayed buried or finally came into the light. The car sat between them, silent, unblinking its chrome, catching the faintest glint of light as if it too was waiting for the choice to be made. The wind outside rose again, rattling the boards. The smell of rain drifted in the first drops, tapping against the roof. The figure tightened their grip on the bag, feeling the weight of history inside it, and in that moment understood that the story was no longer just about a forgotten car. It was about the people, the risks, the sacrifices, and the truth that had waited 50 years for someone to find it. The headlights outside faded, the sound of the engine receding into the distance. The barn was quiet once more, but the silence was different, now charged with the knowledge of what had been uncovered. The car would leave this place. It would breathe again, it would roar again, and when it did, the world would finally hear the story it had carried in its steel and leather for half a century.